I only meant to drop something off at my friend's house. But when his mom opened the door, the look in her eyes told me she'd been waiting for more than a simple visit. I hadn't planned to stay long. It was supposed to be a quick stop, drop off a book I'd borrowed, say a polite hello, and leave before the rain got worse. But when the door opened, and I saw her standing there, everything inside me seemed to slow down. Elena, my friend's mother, looked almost exactly as I remembered her, yet somehow entirely different. The years had softened her edges but deepened something else, a quiet grace that came from living, feeling, enduring. Her hair was swept back in a loose bun, with a few damp strands escaping near her temple, catching the hallway light. She smiled, that calm, practiced smile of someone who's learned to greet the world gently. "Oh, I wasn't expecting you," she said, her voice warm but tinged with curiosity. "Yeah," I replied, holding up the book like a peace offering. "I was just returning this for Daniel. He said to drop it by." She nodded, stepping aside. "He's out with some friends. But you can come in, it's raining harder than it looks." I hesitated, but the faint patter of rain on the porch roof made the decision for me. Inside, the air was warmer, carrying the soft scent of chamomile tea and something faintly citrus, maybe her perfume. The living room looked the same, framed family photos, the piano in the corner, but the atmosphere was quieter now, like a song half forgotten. She moved with unhurried grace, setting out 2 mugs as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "You still take your tea without sugar?" she asked, remembering a detail I didn't even recall telling her. "Yeah," I said, smiling. "You remember." "I remember small things," she replied, handing me a mug. Her fingers brushed mine, a brief, accidental touch, but it sent a quiet ripple through the space between us. I tried to focus on the rain outside, the steam rising from my cup, anything but how close she stood. We talked about simple things at first, work, her garden, the quiet of the neighborhood. But beneath every word was an awareness either of us named. Her laughter came easily, though it carried a faint sadness, like something cherished but distant. I found myself watching the way her eyes softened when she smiled, how the firelight caught in them like amber. At one point, the conversation paused. She looked at me, not the way someone's mother looks at her son's friend, but the way a person looks when they realize they're being seen again after a long time. The silence between us wasn't awkward. It was full. When I finally stood to leave, she followed me to the door. "Thank you for keeping me company," she said softly, as the rain tapered to a mist. "Any time," I replied, meaning it more than I should have. And as I stepped into the cool night air, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd left something unspoken behind, something that had only just begun to awaken. The rain didn't stop. It came down in thin silver sheets against the windows, drumming softly on the roof, filling every pause between our words. I'd meant to leave after finishing my tea, but Elena insisted I wait until it eased up. "No sense catching a cold," she said with a light smile, though I could tell she didn't mind the company. She led me back into the living room. The space felt warmer than before, not just from the fire, but from the way our earlier awkwardness had dissolved into something more familiar. The flickering orange light painted soft shadows on her face, tracing every quiet emotion she tried not to show. I sat on the couch, while she settled across from me in the armchair, tucking her legs beneath a woven blanket. For a moment, we just listened, the crackle of the fire, the hum of rain, the gentle sighs that come when 2 people are learning the rhythm of silence together. "You know," she said, her eyes following the firelight, "this house used to be full of noise. Daniel and his friends, you boys never stop talking. Now sometimes I go a whole day without hearing my own voice." There was a faint smile on her lips, but her eyes betrayed her, that loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being unseen. I leaned forward slightly. "You don't miss the chaos?" Her laugh was soft, almost wistful. "I miss the life in it. The mess, the interruptions. Funny, isn't it? When you're younger you crave peace. And when you finally get it, it just feels empty." The honesty in her tone caught me off guard. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything at all. Sometimes silence speaks better than comfort ever could. The fire popped. She glanced at me then, her gaze steady but gentle. "You've grown up," she said quietly. "I didn't notice it until tonight." Her words landed softly, but they lingered. I wasn't sure how to respond, so I just smiled, a little uncertain, a little flustered. She shifted in her seat, the blanket slipping slightly off her shoulder. Without thinking, I reached over and lifted it back into place. My fingers brushed the fabric near her collarbone, and I could feel the faint warmth of her skin beneath. She looked up at me, eyes wide, not startled, but aware. For a heartbeat, either of us moved. The rain seemed to hush, the fire's glow dimming to a steady pulse. Then she smiled, small, fleeting, but enough to let the air move again. "You've always been kind," she whispered. I sat back slowly, pretending to focus on the rain. But inside, something quiet and dangerous was beginning to grow, that sense that a line had been crossed without either of us meaning to. By the time the rain began to fade, either of us had said a word for minutes. Yet somehow, it felt like we'd told each other everything. When the rain finally softened to a whisper, I knew I had to leave. The fire had burned low, and the clock on the mantel ticked steadily through the quiet. Still, either of us seemed in a hurry to move. Elena sat with her hands wrapped around her mug, staring at the last fading embers as if they were keeping time with her thoughts. I stood, placing my empty cup on the coffee table. "I should go," I said softly, though part of me wished the words would vanish in the air between us. She looked up, her eyes searching mine for a moment longer than politeness required. Then she nodded, her expression unreadable. "Of course. I didn't mean to keep you." But she had, and we both knew it. I followed her toward the front door. The house was dim now, the lamps low, and the quiet pressed gently around us. My steps sounded louder than they should have on the wooden floor. She walked just ahead of me, her shoulders straight, but there was a hesitance in her movements, as if she, too, felt something left unresolved. When we reached the entryway, she stopped by the small table where a bowl of keys sat. Her hand hovered over them for a moment before she turned to face me. "It's still wet outside," she said softly, her voice careful, almost tender. "Drive slow, all right?" I nodded. "I will." A brief silence followed, one of those pauses where the air feels charged, like the moment before a confession or a goodbye. She stood close, the faint scent of her perfume mixing with the clean smell of rain drifting in through the half-open door. I could see the delicate lines near her eyes, the quiet fatigue that comes from years of holding things together. "You're always welcome here," she said finally. Her voice trembled just slightly. "Thank you," I murmured. "For the tea and the company." Her lips curved into a small smile. "It's been a while since anyone stayed just to talk." Something in her tone, the softness, the hint of vulnerability, pulled at me. My hand hesitated on the door handle. For a second, I imagined saying something foolish, something honest, that she made the house feel less empty, that her laughter still echoed in my mind. But I didn't. Instead, I said the only safe thing. "Good night, Elena." She nodded. "Good night." As I opened the door, the cool air slipped in, brushing against us both. I stepped outside, turning back once. She was still there, framed in the doorway, the light behind her casting a faint glow around her silhouette. "Thank you for keeping me company," she said again, her voice barely above a whisper. I smiled. "Any time." The door closed softly between us, but as I walked back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had stayed behind, a quiet, invisible thread still connecting us through the dark. 3 days passed before I found a reason to go back. I told myself it was nothing, just returning a book Daniel had lent me months ago. But even as I pulled into the familiar driveway, I knew the lie for what it was. The truth was simpler. I wanted to see her again. The afternoon light was soft, golden, the kind that makes everything look warmer than it is. A light breeze stirred the garden, carrying the faint scent of rosemary and rain-damp earth. I stood at the door for a moment before knocking, my heart tapping a rhythm that matched the sound of my hand against the wood. When the door opened, Elena's surprise was quiet but unmistakable. "You," she said, her voice a blend of delight and confusion. "I didn't expect. I found this on my shelf." I interrupted gently, holding out the book. "It's Daniel's. Thought I'd drop it off." Her eyes lingered on the book for a moment, then lifted to meet mine. "You could have just given it to him," she said softly, but there was a hint of warmth in her tone, an almost imperceptible smile. "Yeah," I admitted. "But I wasn't sure when I'd see him next." She stepped aside, her hand brushing the doorframe as she motioned me in. The house felt different this time, brighter, filled with the scent of freshly baked bread. "I was just making lunch," she said, almost apologetic. "It's nothing fancy, but you're welcome to join." I followed her into the kitchen, watching as she moved around with quiet confidence, the easy grace of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. Her sweater sleeves were rolled up, and a loose strand of hair had escaped her bun, falling against her cheek. Without thinking, I said, "You look relaxed." She turned, a small laugh escaping her. "That's a polite way of saying I look messy." "No," I said, my voice lower than I intended. "You look real." Her eyes met mine, just for a second, before she turned back to the counter, her cheeks faintly flushed. "You've learned to say dangerous things." I smiled, though my chest felt tight. "Maybe I've just learned to notice things better." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she placed a warm slice of bread on a plate and handed it to me. When our fingers touched, either of us pulled away. The air between us thickened, not heavy, just aware. "You shouldn't look at me like that," she said quietly. Her voice wasn't stern, it trembled at the edges, like she was trying to convince herself as much as me. I took a breath, stepping back just enough to give her space. "Then tell me how to look," I said softly. She exhaled, eyes falling to the floor. "Like you used to? Like I'm your friend's mom." The silence that followed said everything, that we both knew things weren't that simple anymore. And as I stood there, the golden light spilling through the window and catching in her hair, I realized that coming back hadn't been about a book. It had been about her, and the quiet, impossible pull I couldn't seem to resist. The afternoon stretched into early evening, the kind of soft, glowing hour that makes time lose its edges. I hadn't planned to stay. We'd eaten lunch, talked about everything and nothing, books, travel, the way the neighborhood had changed, yet neither of us seemed willing to end it. Every pause in conversation lingered longer than it should, every glance carried more weight. At some point, the sun began to dip low, brushing the walls with a muted orange light. Elena stood by the window, arms folded loosely, looking out at the quiet street. I watched her, the way her reflection softened in the glass, graceful, thoughtful, utterly unaware of how magnetic she'd become in that stillness. "You're quiet," she said finally, turning toward me. "I was just thinking," I replied. "About what?" I hesitated, because the truth felt too heavy to say aloud. "You." Instead, I smiled faintly. "How peaceful it is here. You make it feel calm." Her eyes softened, but there was something else there too, a flicker of worry, of knowing. "Careful," she said quietly. "Peace can be dangerous. It makes you forget what's right." She moved past me, her shoulder grazing mine as she reached for a stack of folded laundry on the couch. Even that small contact left a quiet tremor in my chest. I tried to focus on the ordinary details, the sound of fabric rustling, the faint smell of lavender detergent, but all I could feel was her nearness. Then, suddenly, headlights flashed across the living room window. A car rolled slowly past the house. We both froze. Elena's breath caught, just barely audible. She turned sharply toward me, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Shut the door." I blinked, confused for a moment, until I realized she was looking toward the front hall, where the door still hung slightly ajar. Her tone wasn't stern, it was urgent, fragile. "Please, before someone finds out." The words hung between us, charged with more meaning than either of us wanted to admit. I crossed the room and closed the door quietly, the latch clicking like the punctuation at the end of something we hadn't planned to begin. When I turned back, she was standing near the edge of the couch, her hand pressed lightly against her chest, her breath unsteady. "I'm sorry," she murmured, shaking her head as if to clear it. "I didn't mean, people talk. They always have." "I know," I said gently. "It's all right." But it wasn't all right. The silence after that was full of everything we hadn't said, the closeness, the fear, the want. I stepped toward her, slowly, careful not to break whatever fragile peace still existed. She didn't move away. For a moment, we just stood there, inches apart, the air between us charged and trembling. The rain had started again, faint and rhythmic, tapping softly on the roof like a heartbeat. I didn't touch her. I didn't need to. The look we shared was enough, an unspoken promise of understanding, restraint, and the truth neither of us could name aloud. The sound of the rain deepened, steady and soft, filling the quiet like background music to everything neither of us dared to say. Elena hadn't moved from where she stood, still by the couch, one hand resting near her throat as if holding something fragile and sighed. I could see the tremor in her breath, the way her eyes flicked between the window and me, as though deciding which direction safety lay. I broke the silence first. "You don't have to apologize," I said quietly. "You didn't do anything wrong." Her lips parted as if to speak, then pressed together again. She shook her head slowly, eyes glassy with something that wasn't quite tears but close enough to it. "That's where you're wrong," she murmured. "I did." I let myself forget the world outside that door. I stepped closer, not too close, just enough that my voice wouldn't have to travel far. Maybe forgetting, even for a moment, isn't always bad. She looked at me then, fully, her guard down, her expression open and raw. The years seemed to fall away in that gaze, revealing the woman beneath all the careful composure, someone who had carried too much, given too much, and finally, just wanted to feel something real again. "I haven't felt seen in a long time," she said softly, her words trembling on the edge of confession. "People see me as a mother, a neighbor, someone reliable, but not me. Not the person I was before everything became routine." I didn't answer right away. I wanted to choose the right words, ones that wouldn't make the moment collapse under its own weight. "I see you," I finally said. "Not because you're Daniel's mom, or because I should. Just because you're you." Her eyes closed briefly, and when she opened them, a tear slipped down her cheek, quiet, unforced. I reached up without thinking, brushing it away with the back of my fingers. Her skin was warm, soft, trembling under my touch. She didn't pull back. Instead, she took a small step forward until her forehead rested lightly against my shoulder. Her breath was shallow, but steady, and I could feel her heartbeat, calm but uncertain, thudding faintly through the space between us. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The moment wasn't about declarations or decisions, it was about two people standing still long enough to feel what honesty really meant. After a long silence, she whispered, "You're kind to me. I don't know what that means anymore." "It doesn't have to mean anything," I said, my voice barely audible. "Maybe it's just real." Her fingers brushed against my sleeve, a small, almost imperceptible touch, but it sent a current through me all the same. Outside, thunder rolled faintly in the distance, and the rain softened to a gentle drizzle. The world felt smaller, just the two of us, and the steady rhythm of a moment we both knew couldn't last forever. The rain had stopped sometime in the early hours, leaving the air washed clean and still. I hadn't realized how long we'd been sitting there, her head lightly resting on my shoulder, the fire long since gone to ash. The quiet between us wasn't heavy anymore. It felt calm, settled, like the part of a storm that finally learns to rest. When she stirred, the first hints of dawn were brushing through the curtains, soft streaks of gray and gold creeping into the room. She sat up slowly, brushing a loose strand of hair from her face. For a moment, she just looked at me, her expression unreadable, but gentle, almost peaceful. "You stayed," she said softly. I nodded. "You fell asleep. I didn't want to wake you." A faint smile curved her lips. It's been a long time since I've felt safe enough to fall asleep beside someone. Her words sank into the quiet room like stones into still water. I didn't answer. There was nothing I could say that wouldn't break the moment's tenderness. She turned away, her hand brushing across her face as if wiping away the remnants of a dream she wasn't ready to lose. The morning light grew warmer, spilling across the floorboards and catching in her hair. She looked tired, but in a softer way, like someone who had finally put down a weight they'd carried for years. I should make coffee, she said finally, her voice lighter now, steady. I followed her to the kitchen. The smell of ground beans soon filled the air, rich and familiar. She moved with a quiet rhythm, each gesture deliberate, reaching for cups, filling the pot, humming faintly under her breath. Watching her, I realized how much beauty lived in these small, ordinary things. When she handed me a cup, our fingers touched again, a gentle echo of all the times before. But this time, there was no rush of confusion, no sudden stillness. Just a shared understanding of what had passed between us and what must remain unspoken. Thank you, she said after a moment, her gaze meeting mine. For last night. For listening. For not. She trailed off, searching for the right words. For not crossing a line? I offered softly. She smiled. For respecting one. The quiet that followed was different now, not tense, not uncertain. Just full of mutual understanding. She stepped closer and rested her hand lightly on my arm, her touch warm and sincere. You're a good man, she said. Don't ever lose that. Her words settled deep in me, heavier than I expected. I wanted to say something, anything, to tell her that she changed something in me too, that I'd never see her the same way again. But instead, I only nodded. As I stepped outside, the morning air was cool and sweet, the sky washed clean by the night's rain. I turned once, just before reaching my car. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a pale sweater, a quiet smile touching her lips. For a moment, neither of us waved. We just looked at each other, two people who had found connection in a world that often forgets how to be gentle. And though I drove away, I knew something of her would stay with me, the warmth of her voice, the calm of her presence, and the memory of a night that began with rain and ended in understanding.